scripture reading today is taken from the book of Acts, chapter 1, verses 12 to 14. Then the apostles returned to Jerusalem from the hill called the Mount of Olives, a Sabbath day's walk from the city. When they arrived, they went upstairs to the room where they were staying. Those present were Peter, John, James, and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Bartholomew and Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas, the son of James. They all joined together in constant prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers. So, over the last several weeks, we have been in this series where we're kind of digging into the book of Acts and using it as an opportunity to study a little bit of what the early church was like and how we might apply some of what they experienced to our lives today, to our church today, and what we can learn from what the early church did and how they lived and all of that. And so, over the weeks, we've been talking through a few things. First of all, we're talking about the fact that initially it was not called the Christian church. Right? Does anybody remember what this was called? This movement of God was originally called? The Way. Yes, that's it. They just called it the Way, which kind of gives this image of a journey, right? Like we're on the way. And so it was this idea, at first it was just a bunch of people who had come to believe in Jesus. And they were bound by that common belief, and they were on a journey together. And it was just called the Way. These people that followed Jesus, right? And one of the things we learned as we dug into them is that there really was no organization to speak of, a little bit, but not much. It was not, the church in the earliest stages was not an institution, right? It wasn't a structure or an organization, right? It was just a collection of people, right? People who were brought together. It was a movement of God. The second week, we talked about the fact that it was a Spirit-led movement, that everything they did was led by and empowered by the Holy Spirit, right? And that says something for us, right? This understanding that the church is meant to be a Spirit-filled, Spirit-led body of believers, right? So we talked a little bit about that. And then last week, we talked about the fact that the other thing we see in the early church is that it really wasn't about religion, but about what? Relationship. Right? To be a Christ follower isn't to be a follower of a religious system. It was to be one who was in relationship with Jesus. We said last week that it was all centered in Jesus. Which to us today maybe doesn't sound like a big deal, but back then it was, because every other religious system that ever was and ever has been is a religion. It is a collection of rules and practices and observances. It's about what you do and don't do. But Christianity is not about what we do and don't do. It's about who we know. It's about our relationship with Jesus. And those things that we do or don't do just flow out of that relationship. Because we love Jesus, we try to live good lives. Because we love Jesus, we serve others. Because we love Jesus, we come together and worship Him. But those things are not what make us Christians. What makes us Christians is our relationship with Jesus. So all of that has been a part of what we've kind of studied so far. And then today, I want us to kind of dig into another aspect of their life together. And I intentionally chose this one for this week because I think there is a tie between Veterans Day and military service and what we're about to talk about, what we're about to see in the early church. I got to tell you, and some of you probably already figured this out about me, I have a huge appreciation for those who have served in the military. It wasn't my path, personally. I went right from high school to college. 15 years of age, probably. I already sensed a calling from God that this is what I was supposed to do in my life. And so I went right to college. After college, I took 1 year to work, make a little money, and then back to school, back to seminary. And actually, while I was in seminary, I started my first church, right? And so I never really had the opportunity to have a season of time in the military. But I've always had a great appreciation for what it represents and what it offers, and the values that it pours into our young men and women. Discipline and courage and strength and responsibility and all of that. I think there's something really important to be learned from that actually is a nice reminder of, reflection of what we see here in the early church. Those of you who have served in the military, I think we'll probably all agree that there is a certain community that is built when you serve side by side with other people. Right? You build relationships, right? There's a sense of true community that happens in the military. And when you have this sense of shared mission and all of that, and when you work together, sacrifice, and you see this sense of true community. And one of the things that we see in the first couple of chapters of the book of Acts is that the early church was all about community. It was all about that shared relationship, that way they had a shared mission, and they served side by side, and they, in a way, fought together, and all of that, and it built in the early church that same kind of community that those who serve in the military often feel. This connection that they feel with those that they serve in. I want to show you just a little bit more, but we read a little taste of it in chapter 1. I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 2, Acts chapter 2, and I'm going to read verses 42 through 47. As I read it, listen, see it through the perspective of community. Hear the things that are being said, and see how this reflects on community that they experience in the early churches. It says in chapter 2, verse 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold their property and possessions to give to anyone in need. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. When you hear that description of what the early church was like, you get this sense that they did life together, right? They shared everything in common. They broke bread together. They ate. They shared their meals together. They took care of one another. It said that if one person was in need and another person had something they could sell, they would sell it. And they would take care of that other person's need. They would share each other's responsibilities and bear one another's burdens. And they were just there for each other. And I think this is meant for us to see. We're meant to see that the early church was about true community. And that's something that we as a church strive for. We seek out. We desire. I think it's unfortunate. I've seen churches. I don't think this happens here, but I've seen churches where people come and go and don't know anyone. They just kind of sneak in, they worship, they sneak out, they don't, I shouldn't say sneak, that's not really saying that, but they come in quietly and they leave quietly, but there's no sense of connection, there's no community. But the church is not meant to be that. The church is meant to be a place of connection. The church is a place where we are known and where we know one another. Right? Church is a place where we are loved and we love one another. Church is a place where we are supported and we support one another. And so we see that in the early chapters of the book of Acts. We see this picture of the church as true community. And so, we want that. I want that for us. Right? I want our church to be a place of genuine community, a place where we feel like we're known, we feel like we're loved, and we're able to love others. And so, how does that happen? How does any group of people become community? Well, thinking about the military, right? Looking at how they do it, right? In the military, there are certain things that happen, right? For example, there is shared training. All of you who were in the service, I assume you went through boot camp, right? You went through basic training, right? And so you had this time of, and then many of you probably some extended training after that, right? Some additional teaching and schooling, right? Well, in that shared training, relationships are built. I remember when our son Clifton went to the Air Force basic training, one of the first things they do is take away their phones, right? Because they want them to build community. They don't want them to have a connection with anyone off the base. Right? They want them to get to know one another, build relationships, build that sort of, and so as they're learning together, as they're training together, they build community. The other thing that you'll see in the military is there is this sense of interdependent work. Every person has a job. Every person has a specific role. They are a piece of an overall work. And so every person, and they're interdependent. They all rely on one another. If this one doesn't do their job, then this person's job isn't going to work, or that person's job is not going to come together. And so there's this sense that they all share their skill, their talent, their training, whatever they've been given, whatever they have, and they each contribute a portion of the greater good. Right? And so there's this sense of this interdependent work that we see in the military. Something else, and I know this is going to sound silly at first, but I think it's actually important. They share all their meals together. Right? I think there's something about coming together for a shared meal. Right? You know, in the military, they're all going to gather in a big mess hall, and they're going to sit around the tables and pack in, and they're going to be with other people, and they're going to meet people and talk, and they're going to build relationships and all of that. And so that's a part of that creating communities when they share their meals together. And then, of course, they share a mission. Right? They all understand that they have a mission to do, and a purpose, and they come together to be a part of that. Now, what I find interesting is the reading we just did in chapter 2 actually reflects a lot of the same kind of things in the early church. I mean, think about how it began. Right? It says at the very beginning, it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. So the first thing it mentions is a shared teaching. Right? Just like in the military, they go through training. We go through a shared teaching as the body of Christ. Every time we gather, when we come together on Sunday morning, we're all a part of a common teaching. We'll open the Word, and we'll learn from it, and we'll dig in, and we'll grow in our faith and all of that. And so that's a part of what builds church community, when we come together to learn and to grow. Now, of course, in church, worship isn't the only place where that happens. One of the things that I'm very excited about is by the time we get into the new year, we're definitely going to start doing some small groups, some Bible studies, what I call life groups. And those are another opportunity to come together with a few other believers and to learn together, to grow together. And the reason I usually call those small groups life groups is because you don't just come together to learn the Bible. You come together to do life together. And if you've been in a small group before, you know it's not just about what you learn, it's not just a lesson, it's relationship, right? You get to know the other people in your small group, and you start to share life, and you pray for one another, and you support each other, and all that. And so, again, this is one of the ways that we build community. When we come together to learn in worship, when we come together in small groups and other opportunities, right, we grow in community. Now, I mentioned in the military, they have interdependent work, right? They work all together. Well, we do that too, right? Right? Every time we do something, we share in that work. This past Monday, there was a luncheon down at great, right? And I know some of you helped with that. Some of you contributed to that. You shared that. I think I wasn't able to be there because I talked to someone, but I understand there were like 9 large pots of food, right? A good bit of food there. And no one person would have wanted to prepare that whole meal and serve everyone who came up, right? That was done by everyone, or many people, sharing their gifts, their talents, their abilities, coming together, working. Every time we do anything in ministry, the last church supper we did, right? How many people came together to prepare and set up and break down and clean and greet and all of it, right? We all, Sunday morning. You ever think about how many people are involved in helping Sunday morning happen? Right? From the time we arrive, someone has cleaned the building and prepared for us, right? Someone else has set up coffee hour and breakfast time, and so we can have community together down there. And then somebody else is preparing music, and someone else is preparing to light the candles and ring the bell. And we all have parts, right? We all have pieces to play. And that builds community. When we work together to do the work of Christ, when we have a shared work, it builds relationship. It helps us to be closer. That's what we saw in the early church, right? The early church did that. They had this shared, interdependent work where each used their gift. The other thing we saw in that reading we just did is, just like in the military, they broke bread together, it said. They shared meals. They would gather out in the temple courts. They would break bread in people's homes, right? They shared meals. Is it just me, or is there something special that happens when you break bread with other people? Don't you think? Don't you think there's something about sharing a meal together that binds you with others, that helps to connect you? There's something special about that. And so they did that in the early church. It said they broke bread together and shared meals in their homes, and it was a part of this bonding, this connection that they created, this community. And of course, like the military, they had a shared mission. They knew their work. They knew what they were called to do. And they were doing it together. And so, I think that today, we can replicate much of what they experienced in the early Christian church. Now, they lived greatly in community, and I'm not suggesting we all form a commune. Which one of you has the largest piece of property? But we all just sort of camp at someone's house. Well, I'm not saying that, although they did kind of do that in the early church. But a lot of what they did, we still do today and can still do today. And we can create the kind of community that they experienced. Now, honestly, there's a lot of this that we're already doing. And so some of this is just a reminder to stay the course, to keep it up, to continue to work at it. And some of it is a challenge to step it up and do it even more and do it better and pour into it even further. Right? So thinking about what the early church did, we now apply that to us. How can we become that? Well, they had shared training. Right? So that means for us, it's really important that we're together, like on a Sunday morning, we are right now. This matters. This is important. If you're not here some Sunday morning, you missed. Right? It's important that you're a part of this, right? And when we do finally get some life groups up and running, maybe finding one that fits your schedule and that works well for you can be a time to build that community with other believers. And so we can do that, right? We can have that kind of shared training like the early church had. And of course, we already work together. Many of us finding our places, sharing our gifts. We had a little work project at the parsonage yesterday, and several guys came out to kind of help out, and we each have things that we're good at, that we're gifted for. And by figuring out how I can serve, where I can serve, right, we're forming some committees, right? And so maybe you're going to be a part of one of those. You're going to help us keep the trustees on track, or the finance, or SPR, whatever it might be, right? All that stuff. All those things are ways that we work together. We share together. And of course, my favorite, we break bread. We do the best coffee hour in church I've ever heard Right? You know, that time that's shared downstairs, it's more than just grabbing a cup of coffee and a chip or whatever. I mean, it's beautiful. It's beautifully done, and it's a wonderful time to just be in real community. I love it when I get here early and I actually see everybody down there and just sharing around the tables and loving on one another and all of that. That's great. I think we ought to do more of that. Yeah, we do some public suppers, right? They raise money, they do mission work, and that's great. But we should probably also just do meals once in a while to just be together. John, what were you going to say?
I used to do a thing called progressive dinners.
Those are a blast. Yeah. If any of you have ever done that, it's where a group of people have one course at one home, and then travel to the next person's home for the next course of the meal, and the next course and the dessert. They're great. They're a blast. You know, in the new year, we should think about some ways that we can do more to break bread together. And just share some meals, whether it's as a whole church, or whether it's in small groups at people's homes, like a progressive supper, or just, and it doesn't have to be anything wrong with the church plans. You can just decide to invite a few people and try to include one or two you don't know yet, or don't know very well yet, right? And have some dinner together. Just cool ways to build relationship. There is something powerful in church that happens when we break bread together. And so finding ways to do that I think would be good. And of course, like the early church, we are bound by a common mission. Right? We have a work as a church. God has called us to be a lighthouse in this community. God has called us to be the ones to bring the hope of Christ to the world around us, to serve those in need, to help those who are hurting, to fight with those who are struggling. Right? That's our mission. And so when we do that mission together, we become united. We become community, true community. Well, listen, we spent some extra time with Veterans Observers, so I'm not going to go too long today. But here's what I want you to hear out of this part of the book of Acts. In the early church, one of the things that marked the early church, that made them who they were, is they were true community. Right? They were bound together. And so I want us to be a place of true community. Right? And there are ways for us to create that. There are ways for us to build on that. And so I want to just encourage us to learn from what the early church offered, right? And be able to break bread together and learn and grow together and study and all those kinds of things. And I know we've already gotten a great start in that direction. There are a lot of ways that we already have a great community. I see it every day. Man, I just want us to build on it. I just want us to strengthen it and grow into it and just let it become more and more a part of our experience. Now, when people walk through the door for the first time, they immediately sense this is a place of love. This is a place of community. This is a place where I can be a part of a family. Because we all need that. It's important. There's a reason why it was central to the early church. It helped to create the kind of unity that was necessary for the mission to continue. Shall please join me in prayer. Lord, I thank you.